Paul, let's start with the ongoing lockdown in New South Wales. Quite the contrast, a stark contrast with what's happening in Victoria and South Australia right now.
It is, Kieran, and it's a contrast which doesn't help New South Wales, doesn't help the New South Wales Premier Gladys Berejiklian. The New South Wales numbers continue to look bad. And of course, this has grave ramifications for Scott Morrison in terms of the fact that the Prime Minister, to an extent, is carrying some of the political blame for the lockdowns. And of course, the longer the lockdown lasts, the more the government is under pressure in terms of financial assistance, and the more damage is being done to the economy.
And there's a moment you can see, Paul. You can see it through the windscreen, so to speak, in terms of a few months down the track when the numbers of vaccinations is up around that level that we need. But we're not there yet, and we're still in lockdown. So the government's got a really torrid few months ahead of it.
It's got a really torrid and horrid couple of months, Kieran, and it's a most unusual political situation because there's very little that Scott Morrison can do about it. He doesn't have the mechanism. He doesn't have the tools. Everything depends upon the vaccine rollout, and while that's intensifying and the Pfizer supplies are arriving, and they will grow as we go through September, October in particular, and the numbers continue to steadily increase. That's very important. We've now had about 16% of the eligible population have had 2 jabs, up around 38% have had 1 jab. So we steadily increase, but we're not at the required levels in terms of vaccination that can really affect the lockdowns.
Indeed. Now let's look at the other politics of this week. In part, I guess, it's not dominating the focus. We got the Olympics, you got the lockdowns, and then Labor drops out this announcement. I think it's the right announcement. Certainly, they were damaged in part by appearing like they weren't going to support the aspirational voter. And as we've seen over many elections, that cohort is crucial to winning elections.
Kieran, this is a really big deal. In some ways, I think while it's expected, this decision was expected. In some ways, it's the most important decision so far taken since Anthony Albanese became a Labor leader. And it's about tax, but it's not just about tax. It's about much more than tax. So essentially, what Labor's doing here is that it's formally buried the taxation policy on which Bill Shorten went to the last election. Labor's accepting stage 3 of the government's personal income tax cuts, which are legislated. It had previously announced that it had ditched the policy on franking credits. It's now ditched the policy on modifying negative gearing and capital gains. So this is the taxation framework on which Labor went to the 2016 and 2019 elections. And essentially what Albanese is saying here is that he wants the party to go in a different direction. So he's not just getting rid of the tax policy, which Scott Morrison exploited so effectively at the 2019 election, and he's not just denying Scott Morrison the chance to run another scare campaign. What he's saying is we've got to talk about taking the Labor Party now in a new strategic direction. And that new strategic direction is fairly clear. It's a shift back to the centre, and it's running an election campaign based on the economy, health policy and the pandemic, in which Albanese draws upon, if you like, the Labor economic tradition of national reconstruction, jobs, manufacturing industry, childcare, government investment funds, to really bring forward a Labor policy based on economic growth, jobs and reconstruction. And that very much draws upon the Labor tradition, but it's very much a new departure. It's a new direction from where Bill Shorten was.